Space seemed to conspire in secrecy. At the edge of the solar system, near the Kuiper Belt, telescopes captured the impossible. A fleet of alien ships silently floating in perfect formation. They stood still, like cosmic statues, emitting no signs of life or energy. For humanity, it was both a miracle and a warning. Whatever they were, they weren't supposed to be there. Earth's response was immediate. An international mission was hastily assembled, bringing together scientists, engineers, and military personnel in a desperate effort to investigate the phenomenon. Each crew member carried their own motivations. Elena Vargas, an astrobiologist, sought to uncover whether these ships held clues to the origins of life. Commander Daniel Kwan bore the weight of protecting his team from an enemy he could not see. And Malik Chun, the chief engineer, dreamed of technologies that could transform humanity or destroy it. When Artemis, the mission spacecraft, finally approached the alien fleet, everyone held their breath. The ships were colossal, each larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their metallic hulls shone unnaturally, reflecting a light that seemed to emanate from within. "It's as if they're alive," said Malik, his low voice echoing in the command cabin. But it was more than that. There was something unsettling about the absolute silence, something that made the air feel heavier. As they entered the first ship, the crew found themselves in a place that defied their understanding of physics and engineering. The walls seemed organic, pulsing faintly, as if they were breathing. Alien tools were scattered everywhere, untouched, but there were signs of violence. Destroyed doors, collapsed corridors. It seemed as though the original crew had fled in a hurry. "They were afraid," murmured Elena, her eyes scanning the surroundings. In the center of the main room, a holographic panel flickered to life, displaying an unknown language. But when Artemis's system attempted to decode it, the message appeared in clear translation. "Run while you still can." As the words materialized, the entire ship trembled slightly, as if responding to their presence. It was a warning or a trap. Inside the first ship, everything was disorienting. The walls glowed with patterns that moved slowly, as if reacting to the presence of the intruders. The corridors were tall and wide, yet somehow felt narrow and oppressive. Each step reverberated on the metallic floor, though the sound quickly vanished, absorbed by the strange silence of the environment. "It's like walking inside a living organism," Elena commented, studying the pulsating texture of the walls. But why would a ship have biological characteristics? As they advanced, Kwan led the group cautiously, his eyes scanning for any movement. He gripped his weapon firmly, though he knew that against such advanced technology, it might be useless. The tension grew with every corridor they explored. There were clear signs of abandonment. Alien objects scattered around, doors torn from their frames, and marks that might have been from a fight. "What happened here?" Malik asked as he examined a strange broken tool that seemed to melt under his analysis. No one had an answer. The silence was broken by a distant sound, something between a whisper and a hum, coming from a side corridor. The group stopped immediately. "Did you hear that?" Kwan asked, turning to look at the others. Elena nodded, but Malik seemed confused. "I didn't hear anything," he replied, which only heightened the discomfort. Kwan ordered them to move on, but now the group was more alert, their eyes fixed on the shadows that seemed to shift at the edges of their vision. At the center of the ship, they found a room that appeared to be the command core. A holographic panel dominated the space, surrounded by alien consoles glowing with incomprehensible symbols. Elena and Malik began working to activate the systems. When the main panel finally came to life, a message appeared in a sequence of symbols. The Artemis system quickly decoded it. "You are next." A tremor shook the room, as if the ship was responding to the activation of its systems. Malik stepped back, startled, while Elena tried to grasp the meaning of the message. "This isn't a warning. It's a threat," she concluded, her voice trembling. Kwan, trying to maintain composure, insisted they continue investigating. But before they could move forward, the lights in the room began to flicker, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors they had just crossed. Kwan ordered the group to take defensive positions as they tried to identify the source of the footsteps. Nothing appeared, but the shadows in the corridors seemed denser, almost solid. "This thing is watching us," Elena murmured, sensing an invisible presence around them. Malik struggled to focus on deciphering more information from the panel, but his hands were shaking, making the task difficult. Every second felt heavier, as if the ship were draining their strength. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The group remained still, breathing heavily. "We're wasting time," Quan said, trying to break the tension. "We need to figure out what happened here and get out before things get worse." But no one responded. They all knew the situation was already getting worse. As they left the command room, Elena noticed something strange. The fight marks on the walls they had passed earlier seemed different. Deeper, fresher. "Was this like this before?" she asked, pointing to a series of scratches that ran along the wall like giant claws. Malik shook his head. Definitely not. They were not alone. With every corridor they explored, the ship felt more alive and more dangerous. The walls pulsed with a light that ebbed and flowed, almost like breathing, while the alien symbols flickered and vanished irregularly. The group moved in silence, trying to ignore the growing weight of the environment. "This ship isn't just abandoned," Elena said, breaking the silence. "It's waiting." In the next room, they found something that made their hearts stop. In one corner, there were open capsules large enough to hold a human or something larger. The structures were arranged in a semicircle, each showing scratch marks and signs of extreme wear. Malik knelt to examine one of them, and his sensors picked up biological residues that were impossible to identify. "Whatever was here either left in a hurry or was taken by force," he remarked, his voice low and shaky. Elena examined the walls, where she found partially erased holographic recordings. The images depicted an alien civilization that, at first glance, appeared incredibly advanced. The figures were tall and slender, their bodies shifting shapes as they moved. They spoke in a strange language, but Artemis's system managed to decode fragments. One phrase, in particular, caught everyone's attention. "The hunger has arrived." Before they could process the meaning of the words, the ship's lights began flickering again. It was a pulsating pattern like a code. Quan tried to ignore it, focusing on the mission, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching their every move. "We're running out of time," he said, glancing at the darkened corridors. "We need to gather as much information as possible and get out of here." While Malik worked to access more recordings, Elena felt a shift in the air. Something was different. A distant sound, almost like a whisper, began echoing through the corridors. This time, she clearly heard a familiar voice. "Nam, help me." Her body froze. It was the voice of her daughter, whom she had lost years ago in a tragic accident. She looked at the others, but no one else seemed to hear it. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Malik and Quan shook their heads, but Quan's expression betrayed concern. "We're all on edge. This place might be messing with our senses." Elena tried to focus on the task at hand, but the voice kept calling her, like an echo in her mind. It was so clear, so real, she almost believed it. When Malik finally managed to access more data, the recordings revealed something even more disturbing. The alien crew had documented their attempts to contain something they called the Hunter. It wasn't a physical creature but a presence that seemed to feed on emotions and memories. "It destroys you from the inside out," said one of the alien voices in the hologram. "It takes what you are and leaves only emptiness." The revelation left a heavy silence. Malik looked at Quan, who seemed to struggle to process the information. "If this is true, we're dealing with something we can't even comprehend." Elena, still shaken by the voice she had heard, murmured, "What if it's already affecting us? What if it's already inside our minds?" Shortly after, something changed in the ship. The pattern of the lights became more erratic, and the temperature began fluctuating wildly. Malik started hearing footsteps in the distance, but when Quan checked, no one was there. "We're losing control of the situation," Quan said. "We need to regroup." But before they could leave, the corridor behind them was sealed off by a door that hadn't been there before. They were being guided, but by whom? When they returned to the command room, a new message appeared on the panel. He is already here. The air inside the ship felt heavier, as if an invisible presence filled every space around the team. The holographic panel continued displaying the message. He is already here. Malik tried to look away, but the words seemed etched into his mind, repeating like a mantra he couldn't ignore. "We're being tested," he said, his voice trembling. "This is some kind of game or torture." Quan, staying composed, gave the order to move forward. But each step was harder than the last. The corridor seemed to have shifted, as if the walls had narrowed and the flickering lights were calibrated to disorient them. Each of them felt something different. For Malik, it was as if the sounds around him grew louder, endless echoes of footsteps and whispers. For Elena, the familiar voices, especially her daughters, now seemed to come from every direction, calling her with an urgency that brought tears to her eyes. "Mom, you promised." When they reached a new room, unlike anything they had seen before, they realized they were at the heart of the ship. The environment pulsed with a dark, almost tangible energy, and at the center of the room floated a black sphere, a few meters above the ground. It emitted no light but seemed to absorb any light from its surroundings. Elena and Malik stopped, hypnotized. Quan called out to them, but neither responded. They were trapped, their eyes fixed on the sphere. A piercing sound filled the space, something between a scream and a hum. The sphere began to shift, elongating and fragmenting into shadows that moved throughout the room. It was no longer a static object but something alive, something aware. "He is here," Elena whispered, unaware that she had spoken aloud. The entity didn't need words. It communicated directly with their minds, flooding them with memories and emotions like an unstoppable tide. The shadows began to close in, at first subtly moving along the walls and floor, then taking on vaguely human shapes. Quan tried to pull Elena and Malik back to reality, but both were frozen, as though something had stolen their will. Malik began murmuring, as if speaking to someone. "I know I failed, but I had no choice. I had no choice." His words were fragmented, filled with guilt, as tears streamed down his face. "Malik, what's happening?" Quan asked, shaking him, but there was no response. Elena, meanwhile, started walking toward the sphere, her eyes vacant. She heard only her daughter's voice, repeating the same phrase. "You can save me, but you have to come to me." Every step she took seemed to drain her, her body moving as if in a trance. Quan, desperate, grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Don't look at it," he shouted. The force in his voice snapped her out of it, but her eyes were filled with terror. "It knows who I am. It knows everything about me." Then the entity revealed more. The shadows around them began forming images, memories from the team's past. For Quan, they were familiar faces, colleagues he had lost on past missions, their gazes filled with reproach and silent accusations. "You failed us, Daniel," a voice said in his mind, so clear that he almost believed it. He fought against the sensation, but the words dug deep, unearthing fears and regrets he had buried long ago. The hunter's manipulations grew more intense with every passing moment. The space seemed to warp, the corridors bending and reshaping around them. Malik started screaming, his hands clutching his head as if trying to expel something from his mind. "Get out of my head," he yelled, before collapsing. The shadows surrounded him but did not touch him. Instead, they seemed to observe, like predators studying their prey. Quan and Elena managed to drag Malik out of the room, but they both knew the hunter was letting them escape on purpose. It was a game and they were the pieces. "It doesn't want to kill us," Elena said, gasping for breath. "It wants to break us." As they moved away from the ship center, a new message appeared on their communicators. "You cannot defeat me. You are mine." The group stopped in a corridor near what seemed to be a containment room, marked by alien symbols glowing with a pulsating intensity. Malik was still unconscious, his faint murmurs suggesting the hunter still held sway over him, even in his inactive state. Elena knelt by his side, monitoring his breathing with a mixture of worry and despair. "He's alive, but I don't know if he's really here with us," she said, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. Quan scanned the surroundings with narrowed eyes, analyzing the ship's structure and the symbols on the walls. Something about the luminous patterns seemed to be trying to convey a message. This room is different from the others. It looks protected, he commented. When they finally entered, they found themselves in a space that resembled a laboratory. At the center was a device emanating a faint light, surrounded by alien consoles and structures. Elena was the first to approach, her eyes wide as she examined the object. This isn't just a lab. It's a trap. The alien records Malik had retrieved began to make sense. The ship's original crew had created the device as a way to contain the hunter, but something had gone wrong. Elena examined the consoles and found fragmented data. The messages, translated by Artemis's system, were clear. The hunter cannot be destroyed, only imprisoned. But the cost is high. Before they could grasp the meaning of those words, the shadows began moving again, this time more aggressively. They closed in, occupying every corner, consuming the light emitted by the device. Malik started screaming, his voice echoing through the room as he struggled to stand. "He's here. He's inside us," he shouted before collapsing to his knees, trembling. The black sphere reappeared, floating in the center of the room. This time it wasn't hiding. It pulsed with a dark energy, and its shadows began to take shape, forming familiar silhouettes. For Quan, it was Carter, the friend he had lost on a previous mission. "You failed me, Daniel. You could have saved me." For Elena, it was her daughter, tears in her eyes. "Why did you leave me, Mom? You promised." The words were almost unbearable, ripping raw emotions from them that the hunter seemed to feed on. Despair reached its peak when the sphere spoke directly to them, not with words, but by invading their minds. "You cannot escape. I am the hunger that lives within you. I am the reflection of your failures." Quan, fighting against the panic, pulled Elena away from the sphere and shouted, "Don't listen. It's using us against ourselves." Elena managed to focus on the central device, trying to activate it. But the alien interface was complex and confusing. "It needs a massive energy source to work," she said. "Something we don't have." Malik, who had finally regained consciousness, pointed to the walls around them. "The ship. It's the source. But if we use its energy, it could destroy everything, including us." The decision was impossible. To activate the trap, someone would need to manually initiate the energy drain process, staying behind to keep the hunter contained while the trap was triggered. "This won't hold it forever," Malik said hesitantly. "But it might buy us enough time to escape and ensure it doesn't reach Earth." Quan, taking his responsibility as leader, began preparing to activate the device. "I'll do it," he said, with a steadiness that masked the fear in his eyes. Elena tried to protest. "No, there has to be another way. We can't just leave you behind." But Quan looked at her, resolute. "Elena, you have to take this back. Earth needs to know what we faced here. And you know I'm the only one who can do this." The shadows began closing in again, faster and more aggressively. Time was running out. Quan placed his hand on the console, initiating the process. The entire ship trembled as the device's light began to grow, pushing the shadows back. The black sphere hesitated for a moment before launching itself directly at him. "Run!" Quan shouted as the hunter began to engulf him. "Don't stop for anything." Elena and Malik hesitated but knew they couldn't disobey. They ran through the corridors as the shadows retreated, being pulled toward the device. The ship began collapsing around them, the corridors folding in on themselves. But before leaving, Elena looked back one last time. Quan was surrounded by the shadows, his body glowing with the device's light as he held firm, ensuring the trap was activated. As the ship trembled with the activation of the containment device, the hunter's shadows began to react violently, like a cornered animal. They moved through the corridors, growing and shifting in shape, occupying every space as if trying to suffocate any chance of resistance. The black sphere stood at the center of the room, pulsating in desperation, as if it sensed its time was running out. Quan remained by the console, manually adjusting the device's controls as the ship's lights flickered in frantic patterns. Malik and Elena were only a few meters away, trying to stay out of the shadows' reach, but the environment seemed to turn against them. The corridors leading to the exit were closing, the walls pulsing like a living organism trying to trap its prey. "He won't let us leave," Malik shouted, fighting the overwhelming sensation that the shadows were watching his every move. The entity began attacking directly, not just physically but mentally. Each of them was confronted with their most painful memories, blending into the chaos around them. For Elena, it was the image of her daughter, calling to her with a look of abandonment. For Malik, it was the voice of his parents, telling him he'd never be able to make a difference. And for Quan, it was the faces of his lost comrades, repeating accusatory words. "You let us die." But Quan, focused on the task at hand, tried to block out the manipulations. "Don't let it into your heads," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. He knew the hunter was trying to weaken them, distract them enough to make them fail. The device was almost fully activated, but Quan realized the system required more energy, more than the ship could passively provide. "If it escapes, everything we've done will be for nothing," he muttered to himself. Elena, realizing Quan was prepared to sacrifice himself, tried to approach him. "Quan, we can find another way. It doesn't have to be this." But he shook his head, never taking his eyes off the controls. "Elena, what matters now is ensuring it never reaches Earth. We don't have time for doubts." There was a firmness in his voice that silenced any further protest. Suddenly, the hunter shifted its strategy. The black sphere stopped pulsating and began to divide, forming multiple shadows that spread throughout the room. One of them lunged directly at Elena, wrapping her in suffocating darkness. Malik tried to help her, but the shadows threw him against a wall with enough force to leave him immobilized. Quan watched as Elena, now trapped, began to succumb to the entity's influence. "Mom, come with me. You can save me," the voice of her daughter called, so real that she almost believed it. But in a final act of defiance, Elena screamed, "No, you're not real." With a cry that seemed to shake the room, she broke free from the shadows. The black sphere reacted instantly, as if it had felt pain for the first time. The shadows began retreating, but Quan knew it wouldn't last long. He looked at Elena, now kneeling and gasping for air. "Elena, get out of here. You both need to survive. I'll finish this." Elena hesitated but knew there was no choice. She helped Malik, who was beginning to regain consciousness, and together they ran through the corridors that remained open. The walls shook, the entire ship seemed to collapse, but they pressed on, guided by the light of Artemis waiting for them outside. In the center of the room, Quan activated the final stage of the device. The light it emitted was so intense that the shadows began evaporating, releasing screams that echoed as if they were composed of thousands of voices. The sphere tried to resist, but the device's energy engulfed it completely, compressing it into a pinpoint of light that seemed too small to contain so much darkness. In its final moment, the hunter spoke directly to Quan. "Do you think you can escape me? I am part of you. I will always be here." Quan didn't respond. He pressed the final button, triggering the complete collapse of the ship. His last sight was of the sphere being pulled into the device as the entire ship began to implode. Elena and Malik looked back as they exited the ship. They saw the light of the explosion consume everything, but they also knew Quan had fulfilled his mission. They reached Artemis at the last moment, as the alien fleet vanished in a cascade of brilliant energy. Artemis floated silently in the void of space, slowly drifting away from the wreckage of the alien fleet. The final explosions lit up the stellar horizon like dark fireworks, each flash a reminder of Quan's sacrifice and the overwhelming power of the hunter. Inside the ship, Elena and Malik sat in the control room, their faces marked by exhaustion and emptiness. Neither spoke. What could they say? They had survived, but the victory felt hollow. Elena stared at the main monitor, where energy readings from the debris still pulsed faintly. The containment device had worked, but Quan's and the hunter's words echoed in her mind. "I am part of you." She tried to dismiss it, but she couldn't. It wasn't just a warning. It was a terrifying truth. The hunter wasn't merely an external threat. It was a reflection of humanity, a product of unchecked ambitions and mistakes that had crossed all boundaries. Malik broke the silence, his voice barely audible. "Do you think it's really gone?" Elena took a moment to respond. "Contained, maybe, but not destroyed. Something like that doesn't just disappear." Malik nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "What if there are others? Other things like it? We don't know what else is out there." Elena didn't answer, but the weight of the question lingered in the air. When Artemis returned to Earth, they were greeted as heroes. On the surface, the mission appeared to be a success. The data they had collected on alien technology was seen as a scientific and military triumph. But Elena knew there was more to it. During the official debriefing, she handed over the recovered data but deliberately omitted crucial details: the hunter's messages, the true nature of the containment device, and, above all, its connection to humanity. After the report, Elena isolated herself in her quarters. She retrieved her personal copy of the records, stored on a portable device, and began reviewing them. The alien words translated by the system echoed as a constant warning. The hunger is eternal. The reflection never fades. It was impossible not to wonder. Was the hunter just the beginning? Was humanity doomed to repeat the same mistakes, creating new monsters with every technological advance? Malik carried his own scars. He had felt his mind invaded, his deepest fears exposed and manipulated. Even back on Earth, he felt as though the shadows still lingered around him, watching, waiting. "Do you think it followed us?" he asked Elena one night when the two met to discuss their next steps. She had no answer. "The only thing we can do now is be prepared." Days later, Elena received a message from Malik. He had decided to leave the project, unable to carry the weight of what they had faced. She understood. She also felt the urge to run, but something held her back. Quan's sacrifice couldn't be in vain. If the hunter, or anything like it, returned, someone had to be ready. In the final scene, the narrative shifts back to deep space, where the wreckage of the alien fleet still floated, illuminated by the distant light of a dying star. Among the fragments of Quan's ship, something stirred. A small piece of the black sphere pulsed faintly, like a weakened heart still beating. It emitted a brief flash of energy before disappearing into the darkness. It wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a warning that the hunger was far from over. Back on Earth, Elena gazed at the night sky through her window. The stars felt more distant than ever. In her mind, Quan's voice still echoed, "You need to take this back. Earth needs to know." She closed her eyes, clutching the device with the data tightly to her chest. Humanity's greatest enemy wasn't out there. It was within, and this battle was only beginning.